Welcome to The Explainer. If you're the kind of person who loves peeking behind the curtain to see the hidden gears turning our modern world, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're decoding the hidden mechanics of the global financial system. We are going to take a really structured look at this fascinating corner of finance that operates right under our noses, but that most of us literally never even think about. So let's jump right in and unravel the massive complexities of financial transparency and regulatory compliance risks.
Picture this. You need to move a massive amount of wealth across international borders. Well, you can't just use a bank wire, right? Because that leaves an instant, permanent digital footprint. You definitely want to avoid tripping those massive digital alarms. But at the same time, you can't exactly lug around a mountain of physical cash. It's incredibly heavy. It's bulky, and let's face it, it looks highly suspicious. So, how's it actually done? How does illicit wealth, or even just really private wealth, travel the globe today?
To answer that, we're going to break this whole complex puzzle down into 5 quick chapters: the financial gray area, what are monetary instruments, the tool of choice, the $10,000 rule, and we'll wrap up with balancing privacy and security.
All right, let's kick things off with Chapter 1, the financial gray area.
To really grasp what we're talking about today, we have to take a step back and look at the entire spectrum of how value moves in our economy. On one extreme, you've got physical cash. It's totally anonymous. You hand someone a $20 bill, and there's absolutely zero digital record of it happening. But it's also incredibly bulky. $1 million in $20 bills weighs over 100 pounds. Not exactly something you can discreetly breeze through airport security with. Then, way over on the exact opposite side of the spectrum, you have wire transfers. These are electronic, weightless, and happen in seconds, but they are fully traceable. Every single cent is tracked, logged, and heavily monitored by banks.
So, where does our topic live? Right smack in the middle. It's the missing link. This is the financial gray area. What fills this gap are tools that let you move high value with a physical portability of cash, but with way less transparency than a standard bank account transfer.
Which brings us to Chapter 2. What are monetary instruments?
If we look at the U.S. Bank Secrecy Act, specifically Section 31 CFR 1010.100 DD, if we're getting technical, we find the exact definition of what fills this gray area. A monetary instrument is essentially a form of money or money-like payment paper that can be transferred, transported, exchanged, or used to move value. The absolutely crucial thing to remember here is that they act as portable stores of value. They aren't just a receipt for money. The piece of paper itself literally holds the value.
Now, you might be thinking this sounds like some exotic, ultra-secret Swiss banking tool, but honestly, just look at these examples. We're talking about everyday currency, traveler's checks, your standard personal and business checks, cashier's checks, promissory notes, money orders, and even certain securities or stock. Of course, a normal check made out directly to you isn't really the issue. The real magic and the massive risk happens when these completely common, everyday items are converted into what's known as bearer form.
Now, bearer form sounds like super dense lawyer speak, but practically, it's a remarkably simple action. First, the instrument gets endorsed without restriction, or maybe it's just made out to a totally fictitious payee. Next, you physically hand that piece of paper to someone else. And finally, boom, the receiver now legally owns the value. It is literally the financial version of finders keepers. Whoever physically holds or bears that paper owns the money, and suddenly there's no account name attached to the transfer anymore.
Let's move to Chapter 3, the tool of choice.
So ask yourself, why would someone trying to stay completely off the banking grid actively choose these specific instruments? Well, from an anti-money laundering, or AML, perspective, the threat is obvious. Because these things function as portable carriers of value in bearer form, figuring out who owns them and where they're going becomes incredibly difficult to track. They are literally the prime tools for concealing wealth, moving money untraceably, and converting funds. Regulators see them pop up constantly in smuggling and structuring cases, simply because someone can walk across a border with a briefcase full of massive wealth, completely bypassing any kind of electronic tracking. Now, let's pause for a second because I want to be totally clear and impartial here. Going to the bank and using a cashier's check or buying a money order does absolutely not make you a criminal. These are perfectly legal, incredibly standard tools of commerce. But because they have these unique traits, being super portable and sometimes totally anonymous, they are a massive focal point for controls around cash equivalent movement. They're the exact loophole that modern financial crime regulations and suspicious activity reviews are desperately trying to monitor.
All right, Chapter 4, the $10,000 rule.
Because these instruments are so easily exploited, authorities had to cast a massive regulatory dragnet to catch all this illicit cross-border movement. And that entire dragnet revolves around one incredibly important number: $10,000. This is it. This is the crucial legal tripwire for cross-border transport rules in the United States.
Let's actually look right at the source material for a second. Regulation 3100-1010-340. It explicitly states that, quote, a report is generally required when currency or other monetary instruments exceeding $10,000 are physically transported, mailed, shipped, or caused to be transported into or out of the United States. So that's the foundational rule. If you are crossing the border with more than 10 grand in bearer form checks, traveler's checks, or cash, you absolutely have to declare it.
So how exactly do you declare it? Well, you use something called a CMIR. That stands for the Report of International Transportation of Currency or Monetary Instruments. According to IRS and ECFR materials, the CMIR is essentially the ultimate documentation countermeasure. It's how authorities enforce the idea that, sure, you can legally transport your physical wealth, but you cannot do it hiding in the shadows. It forces transparency right into that financial gray area we've been talking about, giving regulators a crucial tool to monitor smuggling and structuring.
And finally, Chapter 5, Balancing Privacy and Security.
When you look at the big picture of how regulators handle all this, it's actually kind of wild. The legal definition of a monetary instrument physically morphs depending on the context, just to close specific loopholes. Under the Bank Secrecy Act, the definition is pretty broad and includes a lot of negotiable forms. But when you pivot to tax and structuring rules, like the IRS guidelines for Form 8300, the definition suddenly gets really narrow. In those cases, certain monetary instruments are just treated strictly as cash equivalents. Why? Because they have to adapt the rules so people can't just use a money order to conveniently bypass cash reporting laws.
So, what is the big takeaway from all this source material? Monetary instruments are an absolutely vital part of the financial crime landscape. They represent transferable value that's just way easier to carry, hide, and move than regular bank funds. Their exact legal definition really matters operationally, too. It's not just boring legal jargon, it's the very thing that triggers special cross-border reporting and determines exactly when strict AML controls kick in. Ultimately, regulators are walking an incredibly delicate tightrope here, balancing the legitimate need for portable value against the vital, absolute necessity of stopping global financial crime.
I want to leave you with this one final provocative thought. We've spent this entire explainer talking about paper, right? Checks, money orders, physical cash. But as global finance races toward total digitization, and as authorities tighten up the net with tools like the CMIR, what happens next? Will these physical paper stores of value eventually just disappear entirely? Or will this financial gray area simply evolve into new, completely digital bearer instruments that pose the exact same headaches for transparency? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.